Hello and welcome everyone to Planeswalking Trash Talking. Today we're going to take a look at a $10 budget Dimir Surveil deck, which is also, as of right now, playable in standard format. The hardest decision really you're going to make here is, are you going to spend your $10 on 2 cups of Starbucks coffee, or are you going to build this deck, right? So let's first of all take a look at what Surveil actually means. So to surveil number means to look at the top number of cards of your library, then put any number of them into your graveyard and the rest on top of your library in any order. If an effect allows you to look at additional cards while you surveil, those cards are included among the cards you may put into your graveyard and on top of your library in any order. So how do we profit from that surveil mechanic, which is basically just a scry effect with the difference that you don't put the card you don't want underneath your library, but you can put it into your graveyard, which is an advantage in this deck, as you will see later on. So first of all, the MVP in this deck is Dimir Spybug. You want to run 4 of these. It's a 2-mana 1/1 flying menace, which means it can't be blocked except by 2 or more creatures. And whenever you surveil, put a +1/+1 counter on it. So that's technically your best beat stick, because it has menace and flying, which is a great combination here. It grows whenever you surveil, and it also baits out most of the removal early. The next card you want to run 4 copies of is Thoughtbound Phantasm, which is a 1-mana 2/2. With Defender, it says whenever you surveil, put a +1/+1 counter on Thoughtbound Phantasm, as long as it has 3 or more +1/+1 counters on it. It can attack as though it didn't have Defender. So that's basically the second beat stick in the deck. You wanna, well, your perfect turn is Thoughtbound Phantasm turn 1, turn 2 Dimir Spybug, turn 3 something that surveils. And then you start beating your opponent to death. It's a really good card. It also draws some of the removal out. It's not as good as Spybug, but it grows pretty quickly. That's a really good card for the deck. The third card here is Whispering Snitch. Whispering Snitch is a 2-mana 1/3. Whenever you surveil for the first time each turn, Whispering Snitch deals 1 damage to each opponent and you gain 1 life. And please note that this is one of the first cards to remove when you're gonna upgrade the deck, but in order to stay below a $10 budget, we're gonna play 3 to 4 of these guys. But the effect is also not that bad once you think about it. It's a decent source of damage. It has some board presence, so you're able to block with Whispering Snitches. You're gonna have a lot of creatures that are essential in order to get your mechanic working. And Whispering Snitch is something that you can spare, that you can just sacrifice in order to block some big incoming attacks, which is not that bad actually. Also, the life gain is another thing that works pretty well, since you're gonna pay life for Notion Rain and you're probably gonna take some damage over the course of the game. The next card on the list is Disinformation Campaign. That's a 3-mana enchantment, which says when it enters the battlefield, you draw a card and each opponent discards a card. Whenever you surveil, return this to its owner's hand. So why are you gonna play this? First of all, because it's kind of a control tool. It puts some more pressure on your opponent. You're able to draw a card your opponent has to discard, and you can recycle this card over and over again. Each time you surveil, you can return it to your hand. You can play it again for 3 mana or wait until you have the mana to spare. Next up is Creeping Chill. Creeping Chill is a 4-mana sorcery spell, which deals 3 damage to each opponent, and you gain 3 life. Well, don't worry, for 4 mana that's not that great of an effect, but I hope at least that in at least 80% of our games we're not going to play this card for its mana cost. Why is that, you may ask? Well, if Creeping Chill is put into your graveyard from your library, because if you surveil for like any number and you reveal a Creeping Chill, you might put Creeping Chill into your graveyard, and what happens then is you may cast it without actually paying its mana cost. So that's a really good card. You're gonna run 2 to 3 copies of it, not 4. 4 would be too much, because if this card ends up in your hand at one point, it's a 4-mana card and you can't really change it anymore. You'll have to play it for 4 mana. You want these to stay in your deck and to be the cards to be put into your graveyard when you surveil. Now back to some creature spells. we have Blood Operative, that's a 3-mana 3/1. It has lifelink. When it enters the battlefield, you may exile target card from a graveyard, which is also a nice to have tool, especially against Golgari decks or something like that. Whenever you Surveil, if Blood Operative is in your graveyard, you may pay 3 life. If you do, return Blood Op to your hand. So that's basically a creature which kind of also recycles itself. You're gonna pay 3 life for it, yes, but it has lifelink, so if you get through one attack, and you might even... I have seen games where I just attacked with Blood Op every single turn. Something stronger blocked, I gained the 3 life, and I got it back to my hand again. It doesn't really matter, or you use it to block. It doesn't really matter at all. It's a tool of pressure. It's a tool which also builds up your card advantage because you can get it back. So that's a really good card. You're going to run 4 of these. Now let's take a look at the cards that Surveil. So first of all, we have another creature right here. It's Nightveil Sprite. That's probably one of your best friends in the deck. It's a 2-mana 1/2 flying fairy rogue, and it says whenever it attacks, Surveil 1. So why is this amazing? First of all, it's flying, so your opponent is not always able to block it, and also you can trigger the Surveil with every single attack of this card. Most of the other cards are instant sorcery spells, so once you cast them, they're gone. This is your way to repeatedly Surveil whenever it attacks. It works pretty well if you attack with Thoughtbound Phantasm and with the Spybug. It also triggers before the damage calculation, which means that both of the 2 beatsticks gain an additional +1/+1 counter. So that's probably one of the best triggers you have in the deck. Another really, really good card, and your next control tool in the deck is Thought Erasure. That's a 2-mana sorcery spell. Target opponent reveals their hand. You choose a non-land card from it. That player discards that card. Surveil 1. Again, you are able to mess with your opponent's hand, just like you did with Disinformation Campaign. Just this time, you can target a certain card from the hand. You're gonna play this 4 times. I think Thought Erasure is probably the most expensive card in this deck. It works pretty well. It triggers Surveil, that's all you basically want, and get rid of some of the dangers that lurk in your opponent's hands. Next up, and very basic to this deck, is Notion Rain. Notion Rain is a 3-mana sorcery spell. First of all, you Surveil 2, then you draw 2 cards. Notion Rain deals 2 damage to you. So basically, you take a look at the top 2 cards of your library. You decide whether or not you want to draw them. If you don't want to draw one of them, you put it into your graveyard, then you draw 2 cards and you lose 2 life. Other life loss on this card is not really that much of a downside. You're gonna get that back with Whispering Snitch, with Blood Operative, and with Creeping Chill anyways. It's basically a divination with a nice bonus effect. It also triggers anything that interacts with Surveil. The next card you're going to run is an enchantment named Enhanced Surveillance. It costs 2 mana, and it says you may look at an additional 2 cards each time you Surveil, which means if you trigger Surveil 1, you're going to take a look at 3 cards. If you Surveil 2, you're going to take a look at 4 cards. And also you may exile Enhanced Surveillance. You may shuffle your graveyard into your library. So why is this card really good? Because if you Surveil for more cards each time you do, you can fish for your Creeping Chills, which is really good. You don't want to draw them, you want them to be put into your graveyard from your library. Basically what you want to do at some point in the game, you don't want to draw any additional lands anymore. You just want cards that impact the board state, that buff your beatsticks, or that are additional threats you can throw at your opponent. This deck has a really low mana curve, which means it does not need that many lands. So at some point you're just gonna sort them out and put them into your graveyard so your deck is stronger and you can swing much, much harder. I recommend running at least 3 copies of Enhanced Surveillance. I've seen people play 4. I think 4 is a little bit too much. 3 seems like a good number. Next up is Discovery Dispersal. It's basically a card which leaves you two choices. Discovery is a 2-mana sorcery spell which says Surveil 2, then draw a card. It's really good, it enables your beat sticks, it also triggers anything that works with the Surveil mechanic. If you have enhanced surveillance out, you can look at an additional 2, you can sort the cards you're gonna draw. The only downside here is that it is not an instant, it is a sorcery spell. The next card is Dispersal. It is an instant. This time it costs 5 mana, and it says each opponent returns a non-land permanent they control with the highest converted mana cost among permanents they control to its owner's hand, then discards a card. Okay, why is this really strong in this deck? Well, as you have seen, we have a few mechanics that force your opponents to discard cards. We have Thought Erasures, we have our Disinformation Campaigns, and if you have been able to cycle them properly, and if your opponent plays a deck which is not that much relying on having a large hand size, it's going to work pretty well. So probably at this point where you can afford the 5 mana Dispersal, they might not have any cards left in their hand. You play Dispersal, you bounce one card back to the hand, they're going to discard it immediately. That's a really good thing to have because it says non-land permanent. It doesn't only target creatures, it targets basically anything. Next, it's your decision to make which kind of removal you want to run in this deck. First card I want to show you, which is definitely an option, and I'm running I think 2 copies of it in my own deck. It is Price of Fame. That's a 4 mana instant spell. It costs 2 mana less if it targets a legendary creature. It says destroy target creature, Surveil 2. Why is this really good? This is really good if you're up against people who play a lot of legendaries in their deck, so it really depends on the people you're playing against most of the time. It destroys a creature and it triggers the Surveil mechanic, so it's basically a murder for 1 mana more and with an additional Surveil. I think it's decent to have. I think you want to play 2 copies of that as well. Next removal choice that you have is Ultimate Price. That's a 2 mana instant spell which says destroy target mono-colored creature. If you're up against people who play a lot of mono-colored, or at least decks which don't have that many multicolored cards, this is a really good card. It's a 2 mana very cheap removal. It kills many threats immediately, and it's also very, very budget. Now, if that does not look like the removal of your choice, you always have the chance to play Murder, which is a 3 mana removal spell, or you might even play all the other cheap removals which are out there, from Doomblade to Victim of Night to Walk the Plank. It really depends on what you want to play, how you want to play your deck, and what you're facing most of the time. So that is really up to you. Just choose a removal of your choice. I really recommend having at least 2 Price of Fames in there anyways, but you may add a few more to it. Now, last but not least, since we have a $10 deck assembled as of right now, let's talk about upgrades. So upgrades means we're gonna go above the $10 budget, but we are gonna improve the deck quite substantially. The first option you may want to choose is a mission briefing. I recommend playing 1 or 2 copies of this one. It's an instant spell, you Surveil 2, then you choose an instant or sorcery spell in your graveyard. You may cast that card this turn. If that card would be put into your graveyard this turn, exile it instead. It's basically a way to recycle your Thought Erasures to get another Notion Rain out, to play another Discovery Dispersal or one of the removal spells from your graveyard. That's a really okay card. You're gonna Surveil for 2 mana, you're gonna Surveil 2, you bounce back an instant or sorcery card to your hand. That is really strong. And I think Mission Briefing is between $1 or $2 each, so that is okay-ish. Now to the last and strongest upgrade you might want to make. It's Doom Whisperer. That's a 5 mana 6/6 Flying Trample, pay 2 life, Surveil 2. And we all can see why this is an extremely strong card for the Surveil archetype. Why aren't we running this card in this deck? Well, because if you want to play 4 copies of that, you're gonna pay twice as much as you've paid for the entire deck so far. Doom Whisperer is at $5 each, so it's basically $20 for the playset. It is still a very, very strong upgrade, but please note that it is not essential to make this deck work. The deck I showed you so far without those two upgrades works pretty well. It is able to win quite a few games with a quite substantial win rate in casual format. Also, you can run it in standard format. It's more of a control option. You're going to replace Whispering Snitches for the Doom Whisperers, and you're going to squeeze in the mission briefings wherever you think it fits. I hope you really enjoyed this video. If you did, please remember to tap the like button below and follow the channel for more budget deck building videos.